Our talk today is on encouragement. And we're looking upon the encouragers of our lives. And I just found this fascinating. This is about 30 years ago. Sugar Ray Robinson was talking to Harvard. You know, these schools like to bring in famous people to talk to the students. And Sugar Ray Leonard, the great boxer, said, "Everybody is good at something. Well, you students here at Harvard, you're really sharp academically. Do you know what I'm good at?" And the students just look at him. He says, "I'm good at beating people up." So we all have a certain kind of talent, and the word for encouragement in the dictionary, I looked this up, is to give hope, to give confidence to help, to develop. But it breaks down, encouragement is courage, bringing courage, to bring courage to people's lives. And that's what we're looking at, receiving encouragement and then giving encouragement. And I want to open up with an example from a Southern Baptist preacher, C. Roy Angell, and he quotes Dale Carnegie. And this is the perplexing spot. I'm going to ask you to think about how you would encourage this lady. The lady's name, she did really, really good. She got some really good encouraging words that changed her life. But I want you to think about what you would say. And this lady's name was Thelma Thompson. She lived at 100 Morningside Drive in New York City. Dale Carnegie says you can find her right there. And this is her story. During the war, World War II, my husband was stationed at an Army training camp near the Mojave Desert in California. I went there to be near him. I hated the place. I loathed the place. I had never been so miserable. Now remember, I'm going to ask you to encourage this lady. My husband was ordered out on military maneuvers on the Mojave Desert, and I was left in a tiny shack alone. Hey, this is in the 1940s, and there's no air conditioning there. The heat was unbearable, 125 degrees in the shade of a cactus. Not a soul to talk to but Mexicans and Indians, and they could not speak English. The wind blew incessantly, and all the food I ate, the very air I breathed, were filled with sand, sand, sand. Okay, now, remember, you're going to encourage her. I was so utterly wretched, so sorry for myself, that I wrote my parents. I told them I was going to give up and come home. I couldn't stand it 1 minute longer. I would rather be in jail. What would you write back? Dad wrote back 2 lines that changed her life. Because we're talking about attitude. And John Foppe, when he spoke at Kaskaskia College, he was a gentleman who had no arms, and the college brings in people to inspire the students. And if a guy without arms could drink coffee with his feet and help others and serve, they could make it too. The students could. And John Foppe said at the very end of the lecture at the Kaskaskia College at the Jane Knight Auditorium, "What's the most important thing?" And several people raised their hand. "No, that's not it. That's not it." And one kid raised his hand and said, "Attitude." And I thought that was really good. John Foppe said, "It's good, but that's not it either. It's beingness." In other words, John Foppe, without arms, the question is, who are you being? What are you inside? And when I see John next time, I'm going to talk to him more about it, because I've been studying what he thought about with beingness. Now, in our scripture, we'll come back to the solution of this poor lady's story, but I want to share this. This is a great word from the wisdom literature of the book of Proverbs. A word fitly spoken, in other words, a good word, the right place at the right time, is like apples of gold in pitchers of silver. In other words, the right word to a kid at the right time can make all the difference. The right action with another person at the right time can make all the difference. It's just a beautiful way to put it. Now, my favorite encourager and the greatest encourager of the Bible is a guy named Joseph. He's from the island of Cyprus in the Mediterranean Sea, and he's a Levite. Now, a Levite means you are a worker in the temple. And they weren't treated very well. The high priest, we all had the great clothes and all the bounteous food. The Levites had to scrounge for themselves somehow with donations. But when we priests did a sacrifice at the temple, who cleaned up the mess? The Levites. Who made sure everybody was well behaved in the great temple? The Levites. Who was responsible for finding a Gentile sneaking into the wrong area where then he would be killed? That's the Levites. They were the workers. They're the ones that handled all the hard work and the details, and he did that 1 month out of every year. That's what the Levites' job was. They would come for 1 month, serve in the temple, and somehow he saw Jesus. And he was touched by Jesus. He joined the early church, and he was just an amazing guy. He had a field in Cyprus. He sold it. That's a financial donation. And he gave it to the apostles. Now, the apostles were using it to feed. They had no social security back then. They had to feed the widows and the orphans. And they even had a church fight back then, because if you were Hebrew speaking, you got preferential treatment. But the deacon spoke up, and everybody was fed the same. So Barnabas, he is such a great guy. In your life, who are the great gals, who are the great guys that encourage you? They're glad to see you. And when you're with them, you feel better. The joy just rubs off on you. The hospitality is just so wonderful. And the apostle said, this guy, Joseph, he's amazing. He lifts everybody's spirits. He's so generous. We're going to change his name to Bar, his son, Nabis, encouragement. Barnabas, the son of encouragement. He had a new name. Just like Peter's name, Simon's name was changed to Peter, which means rock. He was called Rocky. And so that's his nickname. And he's so great. And the first picture is he's so generous. Now, he has another incredible event. There was a guy called Saul who was killing the early Christians, and he looted the homes. It was awful. And one of the deacons that got killed was Stephen, and he's holding the coats for the guys. Saul is a Pharisee. He's holding to the strict observation of the law, and he gets converted on the Damascus road. Now, after some time, he comes to Jerusalem and wants to say hi to the church. Now, if this guy killed some of our people and looted some of your houses, how happy would you be to see him in church? They wouldn't let him in. Get lost, Saul. We think you're just tricking us to find some more people to loot, some more people to kill. And what happens? One guy, Barnabas, sees him, talks to him at the temple, brings him to the apostles and says, I talked to this guy. This Saul is for real. He's a real Christian. And it's not just anybody telling them that. It's Barnabas. They love Barnabas. They trust him. So if you're trusted, other people will listen. And so they receive Saul, and now they say, please leave quickly now. They don't want him around. And he goes up, and eventually he goes back to Tarsus, his hometown, which is on the Mediterranean Sea. Now, the early church They've been hearing something. They've been hearing, and this is recorded in Acts chapter 11, there's a bunch of Gentiles getting converted a bit north of here in the city of Antioch. What is going on? Gentiles coming into the church? We are very suspicious of this. Who can we trust? Barnabas. Barnabas, you're a Levite. You know all the religious rules. Go up there and check. Barnabas loves the people. He welcomes the people. He's excited about all these Gentiles coming into the church. And he says, I need to get some help. He goes to the city of Tarsus, looks around trying to find Saul, finally finds him, whether it was at the tent-making shop or at a synagogue. He finds Saul and brings him to Antioch, and they work together. They're a powerful team. It's just really terrific. And here's the interesting thing. It says in Acts chapter 11, verse 26, this is the first time in Antioch the people of Jesus were called Christians. Before it was called people of the way, caring for the poor. Now they're called Christians in Antioch. That's the change. And that was so great. Then they hear there's a need of food in Jerusalem. They gather money, and Barnabas and Saul take the money and the food back to Jerusalem to help the hungry people. I want to share one more key spot, and it affects you and me. He did something for you. We ought to be really, really grateful. What the early church wanted in Jerusalem, led by Jesus' brother James, was to turn us into Jews. Us guys, we'd have to have a curly thing going down each sideburn. You've seen the Orthodox Jewish people. We'd have to have a little box holding the Ten Commandments in our hair. We'd have to dress like Jews, be circumcised. It'd be almost like saying, if you're going to join the Presbyterian Church, you guys and gals have to dress like the Amish, sell your cars, and come with horse and buggies to church. And you can't use electricity in your house. You can't have TV, a phone in your house. How's that going to go over? It won't. And Barnabas goes to a big convention with Paul. Now Saul's name's been changed to Paul, which means little one. So we guess he was kind of short. And they convinced the early church, no, let the Gentiles be. Leave them alone. And that was such a gift to you and me, because I don't want to dress that way. I don't want to give up shrimp, bacon, and pork chops. I mean, ham. And so they did us a very, very great favor. So he was the great encourager. He did so much for you and me and the early church. Now, what about the gal? I asked you, what are you going to say to her? She got sand in her food. That doesn't. When you breathe, you get sand from the desert. What are you going? If you were a friend, mom or dad, what would you say? Well, Dad sends her 2 lines. That's all. Just 2 lines. That's a short letter. This is what Dad wrote. 2 men looked out through prison bars. One saw the mud. The other saw the stars. And she was coachable. Dama was coachable. She took it to heart. This is what she said. I read those 2 lines over and over. I was ashamed of myself. I made up my mind I would find out what was good in my present situation. This is a change of attitude. What is good in your life? And concentrate on that, not the dust and the dirt in your food, in your air, or the 125-degree weather. What's the good? I would look for stars. I made friends with the natives, and their reaction amazed me. When I showed interest in their weaving and pottery, they gave me presents of their favorite pieces, which they refused to sell to the tourist. I studied the fascinating forms of the cactus and the yuccas and the Joshua trees. I learned about prairie dogs, watched desert sunsets, hunted for seashells that had been left for millions of years ago when the sands of the desert had been an ocean floor. What brought about this amazing change? The Mojave Desert hadn't changed. It was still hot. The Indians hadn't changed. I changed. Now, doesn't this sound familiar, what Jesus is trying to do with our hearts? I changed. I changed my attitude of mind. And by doing so, I transformed a wretched experience into the most exciting adventure of my life. I was stimulated, I was excited by this new world I discovered. I was so excited I wrote a book called Bright Ramparts. Bright Ramparts. In other words, a change in attitude. Everything else is the same. Going from a complaining spirit to a spirit of appreciation. What was good right there? I'm going to give another example of hospitality. These angels are very encouraging. When I was at a Presbyterian meeting a couple of months ago in Mount Vernon, I'm sitting there at their fellowship time, just like we have here before the meeting, and having some food and coffee. And this minister comes up to me. He's smiling with a big smile. He's a retired pastor. Pastor Evans, I want to thank you. And I go, for what? I didn't do anything for him. You and your prayer chapel sent an angel. He had gone through heart surgery. And I keep that angel on my kitchen counter. I look at it every day. What does our prayer chapel, what does our angel ministry do? It encourages people when times get a little tough. I was just shocked. And the final illustration comes from a person you saw on TV. His name is Benjamin Zander, and he conducts on public television the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra. Have you ever watched him on public TV? And he's leading the orchestra, maybe the Stars and Stripes. He's a great leader. He's very famous, and he writes a book on leadership. So I got this book on leadership, and he tells a story of encouragement. And I'm closing with this, because we're talking about how we could be a blessing by encouraging. A little girl in second grade underwent chemotherapy for leukemia. What happens? You lose your hair. Now think about this. What happens when a kid goes to school? Remember those days? For me, it was a long, long time ago, but I kind of we could be pretty rough at times as little kids. This is a second grader. When she returned to school, she wore a scarf to hide the fact she lost all her hair. But some of the children pulled off the scarf, and in their nervousness, these are second graders, laughed and made fun of her. The girl was mortified. That afternoon, she begged her mother, "Don't make me go back to school." Her mother tried to encourage her by saying, "The other children would get used to it. And anyway, your hair will grow back soon." If you were the teacher, what would you do? I'd probably lecture those kids. "Shape up, you rotten kids." What does the teacher do? The next morning, when the teacher walked into class, all the children were sitting in their seats, some still tittering about the girl who had no hair, while she shrank into her chair. "Good morning, children," the teacher said, smiling warmly in her familiar way of greeting them. She took off her coat. She took off her scarf. Her head was completely shaved. After that, a rush of children begged their parents to let them cut their hair. And when a child came to class with short hair newly bobbed, all the children laughed merrily, not out of fear, but out of the joy of the game. And everybody's hair grew back at the same time. You see, that was an encouraging teacher. And that's what Jesus calls us to do. Let's encourage each other. Let's be the encouragers in the community. It doesn't have to be with words. Anastasia just held the hand of our wonderful, famous orphan, Arnold Gluck. Just held his hand. He'd whisper a few things once in a while, but that's all it is. You're holding the hand, you're crying with somebody, you're being with somebody. That's encouragement. And you do that. You really do that so well, because God makes you into a blessing. Amen.